Glad everybody is here virtually. I need approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
So Dave and Mark, are you getting, should they say their name, Rebecca, or are you?
I can follow them right now, but that would be helpful if they would say their names.
Yeah, maybe we should, because to help the recorder. All in favor of the approval of the agenda?
Aye.
Aye. Now, should we do all roll call by names?
I think that would make sense as we move forward. We have a few action items tonight. And when we do that, I think that would be helpful for clarity.
Okay, when we do action items, I think we can call it to order like this.
Yes.
Okay, and what are we doing with public comments, Randy?
As of this meeting, I have not received any public comments. Okay. So what we were doing with, I'm going to share my screen with everyone. So if you just pause for a second. Just checking, did my screen come up for everyone?
Yep.
Yes.
So this is just the agenda.
Oh, Mark, I see you.
All right, awesome. So public comments, the way we have conducted that was on our notice. We had a provision where people could send them in to the district administrator email. I will just double check on my phone here real quick to see if there's any that came in, and I do not see any. So we do not have any public comments this evening.
Okay, so the first agenda item is to update us on action plans. Although, Randy, are we going to approve the policy?
The first order of business under here is one of the provisions is school board policy. And what I'm going to pull up right now is a policy that we've worked on this week. We've adopted it from the School Board Association and some of their model language. This is a policy that I recommend that we adopt this evening, and I think it is a good guidance for us, not only in this COVID-19 time period, but also in the event that we ever have any other sort of emergency situation where we need to be operating remotely. So this policy really walks through the situations of when we would be operating under emergency situations. It talks about how we would move forward with notifying and operating those meetings, talking about the locations, and that the policy allows for us to continue to meet remotely. This does not supersede any other policies during normal operational times. It's specifically for those times when we are in an emergency situation, such as the pandemic that we are experiencing now. This talks about the requirements for how we would do our business remotely, and it also talks about just as far as who's presiding over the meeting, etc. The piece that I'm hovering over right now is just talking about who's present at the physical location. Tonight we have Rebecca and Taylor are there. Taylor's operating the IT for the live stream, and Rebecca is taking notes and supporting there in the event that anyone showed up in person, because Bethel Circle was open as a place to view it in person if somebody did not have computer access. There's also a provision here that says the board president and the district administrator would be at the site unless it's under extraordinary circumstances. I think we felt that this was an extraordinary circumstance and wanted to minimize the number of people in any one room at this current time. I think the piece that it does speak to is what you've already spoke to, Joan, about roll call votes on decision-making items. And then also really a conversation with regards to the quorum. We have all 7 board members online here this evening, but should anybody get kicked off by their internet, I think that's a piece that we just need to have common agreement on as we move forward with tonight's meeting. But certainly there's provisions that are written in here with regards to that as well. So I think this policy is really a piece that's a necessary piece for us to move forward with. If you go back to our emergency meeting we had a couple of weeks ago, right after the school closure, we did at that point make just a verbal motion of the board that we would have permissions to be meeting virtually. I think this solidifies it in a much more policy-driven way and is the recommended way for us to be moving forward. So with this, I'd entertain any questions that you have. And once we complete any of the question and answer piece, I would ask for the board to consider making a motion to adopt this tonight and for moving forward for our process.
Thank you, Randy.
Randy, is this the policy modification request, the memo that you put out, or where is
No,
it?
this is one that I emailed you yesterday, Jack. This is not in the board book packet for tonight because it was in process. So this is a different piece than that. This is specifically a board policy that is with regards to remote participation at board meetings and conducting board meetings in emergency situations.
It appears above the agenda. If you click on the agenda part from board book, you click on that, it shows above the agenda.
Oh, as far as like all of our posting things, Julie, is that what you're talking?
Correct. Because
Right.
I printed it off and it printed off after the details about where the meeting was being held and the time and everything. Then there was that little paragraph and then the agenda of the meeting appeared.
Right. Correct. So that was kind of how we noticed things. What you have on your screen right now is actually a recommended board policy for adoption.
I thought it was very
Everybody?
comprehensive.
Yep.
And really covered all the bases that we need to be able to conduct business with transparency.
Yep.
Yeah, I felt it was very, it included all of the components that we need to think about. So I would entertain a motion to adopt this policy.
So moved, Julie.
Second, Judy.
So I'm going to call for a roll on that, and I'm just going to always do it in alphabetical order. Betcher,
Aye.
Brandt,
Aye.
Engelbretson,
Aye.
Heineman,
Aye.
Hetzel,
Aye.
Weiner,
Aye.
and Ensign, aye. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so that was the first item, Joan, that I wanted to bring forward, which was the policy that gives us the guidance moving forward during these emergency times for conducting our business. The second item under here is what Jack was referring to. This is a memo that I sent to the board and included it in the board packet. It also has a few items that I have a few members of our administrative team here to speak to. So what I'd like to do is just walk through the whole document and then come back to any questions if that's fair enough for everyone. The first item is just what I'm asking for is some latitude, specifically for these COVID times, for some latitude on board policy. The first one is with regards to directory student data. We currently, and this is basically name, address, phone number, email that we have. Obviously, within our systems for students, we have a policy on how we can share that information out or facilitate the sharing of that. Right now, it states that we generally do not share that information out unless that there's written permission to do so. There's certain circumstances that we do share it out with recruiters, etc. But this is particularly a request that came from our elementary administration with regards to really families wanting to have connections with classmates and being able to, in these remote times, to be able to at least call, connect virtually, etc. with them. So what I'm asking for here is for us to basically have a modification of the policy for our teaching staff, and if families so choose, to be able to really kind of fill in like an opt-in form or a Google form of some sort that would allow them to say, I want my information shared so that I could have the contact information for classmates. So that's really the first policy piece that I would ask for some latitude on tonight. Okay. I guess maybe it is easier just to go step by step. Any questions with regards to that part of the memo?
So Randy, do you want us to vote on each of these?
I do I would, yes. I mean, so the ones that have the board policy pieces, I would like an action item on, correct?
And should we do those one by one as we talk through them?
Sure, I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So if we want to do that as we kind of walk through this memo, that's fine. All of the items on the memo do not need board approval. Some of them are FYIs, but the ones that specifically are with regards to policy, they do need your action in order for us to move forward with.
Okay,
Do you foresee any problems with this, Randy? You know, obviously parents have said, hey, I don't want to participate in other situations. Do you think that may create some challenges?
Or
how do you police that?
Do it as an opt-in. We're not going to just collect. We're not going to just pull them from our system and share them. I think this would be an option we could send out to families and say, if you want to share information so we can share it with your children's classmates, then they can opt in. If they're not comfortable with it, they don't have to participate.
Randy?
Yes.
So if I were to opt in as a parent,
Yep.
I'd be opting in and anyone would have access to that.
Well, it would probably, we'd probably have some controls to that, Mark, where at least what I'm envisioning is this being for, like, if my child's 4th grade class were to put out a form of that nature, that it would be available to those classmates. So it wouldn't just be wide
open.
So
that was my only concern, is that as long as there's some controls on it,
yep.
So that it doesn't make you universally available.
No, I mean, when you go back a number of years, we used to have this as a much more wide open process, and some of the concerns that you're bringing up did occur. But I think in these times, the one thing I think I would argue is that I think the risks aren't as significant as trying to address some of the isolation of kids being at home. And I think that this would be solely right now for these purposes. And then once we're back to operating under normal circumstances, this would not be in place. But I think for right now, it's an opportunity for at least families who choose to be able to at least gather information if needed.
okay, so I would take a motion.
I move we approve this new policy. Mark Hetzel.
I seconded. Judy?
Does anybody have any other questions or want to discuss this further?
I do. I guess my concern on it is maybe goes off of Randy's last comment there, is that in normal times we wouldn't do this. And I know this has been a question that I've had people ask me specifically about prior to this happening. So the question would be, why don't we normally do this, and why does that situation not apply now?
Right. Well, and I guess I think I'm going to give you 2 answers to that, Mike. I think we used to publish them in a much more larger format, from my understanding. I think some of this predated me, and where we had some other utilizations of information that were shared by parents. So we really tightened down the policy. I think it was actually my first year here about 12 years ago. The second piece is this is actually a policy that I was planning to bring back through our normal process to have this discussion, because this policy also prohibits really sharing some of this information, which is causing some issues for families who are trying to connect in with their children's classmates, particularly at the younger levels, possibly not being able to get some of that information from younger children, school not being able to provide it. So I think that there's definitely a desire for us to revisit this down the road, and it would be something I think genuinely we would support. Obviously, we need to have some conversations to make sure that we do it correctly, so doesn't bring up the concerns that Mark does. But this policy was one that I would bring back probably even after the COVID situation is passed, for us to revisit to see how we can be more amenable to some requests from families. And again, I would only see this as an opt-in type thing. I would not want this where we just generate a list and send it out.
I would like to say, as we're looking at these policies with the idea of putting a requirement on them about this current situation, I think we need to somehow specify what that means. For example, we have a stay-at-home order from the governor right now. Should we tie this all to that? So that
I
we
don't
have
hear you
specific
very well,
manner?
Dave. You're very garbled.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to say, is there some way we can tie this to the governor's specific policy so that we know when the real end date happens?
I think that makes sense. I think what Dave is saying, is there a way we can tie this to the specific orders that we have from the governor of the school closures? I think that's absolutely correct. That's really what I believe the policies we're looking at tonight, I think, are really in addressing that. And the next one, when we talk about grading, I think really starts to address kind of the second semester of the school year. But I would agree with that the spirit of this is to bring these forward for the times that we're in, given the orders and the closures and the specific situations that we find ourselves today.
Well, I guess the one thing I would say on this is I'm supportive of the idea, but what we're looking at on the screen right now isn't actually language for a policy. It's more direct permission by the board to the superintendent to suspend normal procedure.
That's right. I would agree with that, Mike.
And I mean, I'm fine with that because this isn't specifically a policy language.
No, this is really not a policy rewrite. Think of this very similarly to how I just need some latitude per the policy to provide for this provision, which right now is not implicitly implied within the policy to be able to do. So it's really not a rewrite of the policy. It's giving me some latitude to operate outside of policy to accomplish some needs that I feel are legitimate with some of our students.
Okay. Any other questions for Randy? Are we, okay, it's not a policy, but giving him some latitude? So I think we're ready to vote on this. Betcher?
Aye.
Brandt?
Aye.
Engebretson?
Aye.
Heineman? Heineman?
He's muted.
Hetzel?
Aye.
Weiner?
Aye.
Have you had people hear you on this microphone?
Is Jack here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry about that. Aye.
And Ensign? Aye. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Okay.
All right, the next item here is again, and I guess I would phrase this in the similar vein as how Mike presented the last one. This isn't really policy language. When you take a look at our current policy for grading, it says that no pass-fail grades will be offered, no courses will be offered on pass-fail basis at the high school or the middle school. Given the situation we're in right now, when we look at policy 345.1 rule, that's the language that we have. As we are starting to look at really the work that we're moving forward with here over the number of weeks, and my anticipation is that it will be extended at some point here, is that how do we move forward with grading, particularly at those secondary levels? Our administration has been really working with our colleagues around the area within the Badger Conference in Dane County. Generally, the practice has been moving towards a pass-fail grading system at middle level and high school. There are some exceptions with regards to some dual credit programs at MATC, UW Oshkosh CAP courses, and some other specific places where letter grades may still be required. One of the things that Brian and Marcy have done is worked with their staff to really get a sense of kind of where people are with regards to moving grades forward for this last part of the school year. And you can see the data that was brought forth with regards to their support of this being in the mid to high 80% of the staff really looking at that from their perspective. I do have Tim Schell, who has worked very closely with this, Brian Borowski and Marcy Peters-Felice also on this meeting. And I guess I would ask them to just provide any background that they have with regards to this issue. Maybe I can start with Tim first, and then Brian and Marcy, you can fill in from your staff's perspective.
Sure. How's my audio? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. So, this is a question that really just about every educational institution, whether it's public school districts, private schools, institutions of higher education, has had to really take a close look at in regard to the current situation, primarily because there has been such a disruption with differences in terms of how certain concepts can be addressed, how much instructional time there is, student access to technology, and quite frankly, disruption at the household level. So there are any number of factors that are making this a very abnormal situation. And I think at the most extreme, you can consider the situation of our more project-based learning classes, art, career and technical education, and others, where it's extremely difficult to substitute. But we know we have a lot of students who, even though they're engaged, aren't engaged the way they could be. And we know that even though our community so far has been largely spared any severe impacts from COVID, and we certainly hope that continues, we cannot assume that will be the reality. We also know that we've had adverse economic developments that are having impacts on households, many households in our community. We cannot be sure that that won't become more severe over time. So just a lot of things where we're not in business as normal. And I'm sure Brian and Marcy will speak to this, but for both the middle school and high school, and we have students that are struggling, we have different levels of supports for the kids. And that looks very different in our remote learning environment. Now, I think the question we had to examine is, what are the impacts? And so in general, most institutions are wanting to offer some form of a pass-fail accommodation, or perhaps more appropriately, a pass, no pass accommodation, simply because students are in very difficult situations. Many of them are anxious about maintaining their GPAs under these situations. And secondly, quite frankly, even if we were to give a letter grade, it would be very hard to defend that A-level work second semester this year would be the same as A-level work in a more normal situation. So you have the question about comparability on the transcript. We have checked with our higher education partners. Randy's reflected this in the memo. There are some situations where we are going to need to provide letter grades for some external partners. It's also the case, though, and I think this is the biggest question that some students and parents may have in mind, it's a question we've had, is what about college intending students? How will admissions offices, whether it's for second semester seniors or for students in the high school that are accumulating transcript grades that'll contribute towards admission decisions in the future, how will this look? And the reality is this is playing out nationally, and colleges and university admissions offices have been very clear, not only for this year's seniors, but for 9th, 10th, and 11th graders as well. They're going to understand that the spring semester of the 2019-2020 school year is very different. So with all of those considerations in mind, we feel that this is really the best route to go to best meet the needs of all students in our current situation.
Yep. Marcy and Brian, let me start with Marcy from the middle school. Just your thoughts with regards to this before we open it up to the board for questions.
My staff wants us to make a decision. What they're concerned about is getting feedback to the students. And the students right now, they're in flux because they don't know what's happening with their grades. And so the staff is really pushing for this. They're very supportive, as you can see by the 89.3% of the middle school teachers are highly supportive or mostly supportive of going pass-fail. We figure the rigor is very different. The learning, we want our kids to continue learning, but the reality is remote learning, the rigor is not there. And so we want to make sure that we continue to provide feedback to our students, but not put that emphasis on a letter grade, but just help them to keep that learning so there's not that slide for whether we go back in the spring or when we go back in the fall.
Okay. Ryan, can you reflect thoughts from the high school?
Yeah, staff are pretty supportive of this. When I sent the survey out, I gave, I believe, 4 options, and this was by far the top option. We also threw out the option which UW's original option, which was you pick your grade. Either you want pass fail or you can continue to maintain letter grade. That only had like 50% support. So this was the top option, and just to fill in what the other schools in the Badger Conference are doing, I think everyone except for one right now is going either pass fail or pass no pass. Now there's a little difference between some schools are counting the F as something that would count against kids, and some schools are just saying, regardless of what happens this semester, none of this impacts a kid's GPA. So there's a few schools in the Badger that the F would count, but the majority are saying that no, it's not going to count, and a few of the schools are doing the pass, no pass. They're going that angle, and just to kind of also give some information on this. I met with them today, and obviously virtually, and this is a true struggle, and some of our surrounding said it's not impacted us, at least not we've heard yet, but some of the area schools and Badger Conference schools are very much impacted by this, either parents or family members, and it's a true crisis for some families. And again, we're fortunate right now, but I'm not, we can't guarantee that moving forward, and can't guarantee any of this moving forward, what this is going to look like. But this would at least give us an opportunity to go this route, take the pressure off kids, take the pressure off families, and we obviously would have to develop what this would look like, and what exactly is a pass, and if we're going pass fail, what's a fail or what's a no pass. So, but it is hugely impacting all the schools in the area and the Badger Conference, and it was a lengthy conversation today about this, and there's different variations of what schools are doing, but all of them minus one who's not there yet, but will be there shortly, they think, that they're either going pass fail or pass no pass. That's what I have to add.
Yeah, I know in my conversations with Brian over the last few days, one of the things he's looking for is latitude, is if the board were to approve this motion tonight, which would allow us to, again, during the period of this semester, to be able to look at the pass fail or pass no pass type option. He would also be then working with his staff on really helping to define exactly what that means. So that'd be a piece moving forward. So with that, I'd entertain any questions that you have, and ask Tim, Marcy, and Brian to help and assist in answering some of those.
I guess the challenge that I would have is, with the pass fail, is how do you measure their progress? How do we know that they're really learning and moving forward? Our discussion is we don't want them to slide back, but I would suspect that some of these kids could excel in this situation as well.
We have thought about that too, Jack, and what we have done is we've created a document for the middle school where teachers are letting us know which kids are not going in. Plus, Mike and I also have Schoology access now, so in our tier 2 meetings, we address those kids that the teachers are not hearing from, and that's how we're trying to keep them with us, because so they go in and they can see when kids log into Schoology, they can see what they're doing in Schoology, and if they don't see a kid for a day or two, they reach out to the student, they reach out to the parents, and if they do that and they still don't get any response, student services becomes involved. And today we had a tier 2 meeting, and the counselors, social workers, and the school psych have all taken a couple of names of kids that they would be directly contacting families to provide support.
I would speak to
Well,
that.
I'm glad to hear that you were looking at supporting kids who aren't seeming to participate, because I would really want to have a low threshold for passing. You wouldn't want to, you really want to know the situation so that their health wasn't impacted, or the family situation is very well documented before you fail or no pass somebody.
Right. And even before we got this information, Judy, we were aware of certain family dynamics. So our social worker, John Wild, has already reached out to some families who live out in the country area where internet is not great. So they got hotspots for them. We've been doing all these things because we realized that many of our kids, they're not disengaged because they want to be disengaged.
Yeah.
Schoology was an issue last week, and it was very frustrating. We've turned the corner now. So what we talked about, some of the kids that showed up on the list for this week, we put watch next to their names because we just feel it was one class only. All of the other classes, they logged in, and so many of the classes were electives, and we felt that kids were just gunning after those core classes when they could get into Schoology. But we are taking into consideration certain dynamics with families.
Good, thank you.
Are you still doing skill tests and things like that, or is it I just get on the internet and I watch and do some exercises and that's it?
Well, that's going to depend. That's going to depend, Jack, a little bit on the actual course. I mean, some courses are easier to make a trend. So, I mean, I think there's two issues here. I mean, one is depending on the discipline, some disciplines more gracefully translate to remote learning than others. So, so that's the first aspect. And then the second thing is that because we need to provide flexibility for everybody that's concerned, the idea of trying to synchronize the schedule, that if I have a 3A class, I'm meeting at the 3A hours of the day, we just don't feel as feasible due to family schedules and families' technology situations and some of our staff situations as well. So, so in some courses, it's looking in many respects like it might normally look, and in others not. I mean, for example, there will be AP exams in the spring, later in the spring. College Board is making significant alterations to the AP exams so they can be done online by technology at home. So it's just not going to look the same, even where it's as similar as it can be. And I think, you know, in all of this, I don't dispute, Jack, that there are students who can be successful in this situation. However, I think we have many students who are not as well positioned to be as successful in this situation. And, you know, certainly, as Brian alluded to, one of the options we explored with staff was that UW option where we give students the option to choose a letter grade or pass-fail. Our concerns administratively, and I think the teacher concerns, were that'd be very unwieldy. When would students decide? When would they second guess? Teachers having to basically think about grading some kids on a pass-fail basis and other kids on a letter grade basis. We felt it would add more complexity to an already complex situation. And also the recognition that the kid who feels comfortable today, both parents could potentially lose their job next week, or somebody could get sick, and all of a sudden what seemed like a manageable situation becomes less manageable.
No, and I agree with all those points, and I'm not totally against the pass-fail, but how do I know as a student that I have mastered, you know, the topic?
Good question.
And you know, if you can at least give them some assessments as they go along, then when, you know, let's say there is a slide next year or through this handful of weeks that we're in there, you know, now you've got better information going into next year, so your teachers are prepared. You know, that's where and I understand that, you know, there's stress and there's internet problems. seems like we're taking care of it. But I think it seems like we should be assessing these kids somehow.
We are assessing them, Jack. Like one of the departments I work very closely with is our ELA department. And what they've done is they focus on one standard a week, and they give students certain things to address that standard. And they are assessing if the kids are meeting each standard that they put before the kids. There's a lot of assessing. It just looks different. The teachers also have the hangouts with the kids, so they get to see the kids get to see them. There's a lot of communication that's going on with the teachers and the students, and there's a lot of feedback, and they are assessing. The question that had come before me this week is, should they be putting grades in Infinite Campus? And I said, until we have a board meeting and we know where we're going, I would just say, keep giving the kids feedback so that they know you are there, you're watching what they're doing, and you care about what they're doing. And so there's been a tremendous amount of that's a lot of give and take between the teachers and the students. I sat in on one of my special ed teachers working with 2 of her students yesterday, and I said, can I just sit here, don't even introduce me, don't say I'm here, I'm just watching you guys. And it was amazing to see my kids with IEPs able to connect remotely with their teachers. I wish, I can't explain it enough, but it's happening, Jack. It's happening.
No, I understand that, and I think just having some assessment, and I'm totally fine with giving pass-fail at the end, but you know, giving some type of more than just a pass-fail, even though you don't put it in the grade book, I think is important for some of these kids.
And I think part of the work that the staff is looking at are trying to identify what are those essential learning outcomes and standards that we can deliver, that we can kind of continue to move some of our pieces forward. At Monday's board meeting, you will see the results of a survey we did with families, students, and staff. And some of the pieces that came out of that were with regards to amount of work moving forward. Is it too much, too little? Is it overwhelming? Is there more information, more that we can do? And I think generally, as we kind of looked at last week as really kind of a soft launch of our program, now looking at kind of how some of the grading pieces fall, looking at our essential learning outcomes or some of those items that we feel we can continue to move our kids forward with, I think some of those will address the concerns that you have. And Brian or Tim, do you have anything to add to that? Oops.
I would just say that, add on to what Marcy said, that we have each teacher has learning standards for the week. Kids get the assignments, so they are being assessed each week. They have things to do. We tried to encourage them to make sure things were authentic, were important to the carrying on with their curriculum, and things that they absolutely positively need moving forward in finding creative ways to meet those needs. I would just say, I think Tim mentioned this before too, is when we have regular school, it's easy to scoop kids who are struggling. It's really a challenge now to scoop kids who are struggling. And some kids are thriving in this environment, and some kids that were thriving in the regular school environment are really struggling in this environment because of the structure, right? We're putting a lot of emphasis on students to have to structure their days to make this work for them, and so it's just vastly different. All the systems that we had in place during an 8-hour school day, those have been removed. And we're trying to recreate that and build a new environment. And, we're just thinking pass, fail, or a system like that, pass, no pass. It gives us some more latitude, but we do want kids to keep moving forward, because eventually we will come out of this and they will progress into the next class next year. And they will need to have those skills. So we're still trying to keep kids moving forward for sure.
Yep.
And if I can interject, it seems to me that the current model wasn't what we picked to start the school year. And so there's a certain, this vehicle for instruction wasn't the ideal. It's the best we have. And I think we have to trust our professionals that they understand the outcome at the end of the year may be somewhat less than it normally would have been. And as they're preparing classes for next year, they're going to have to take that into accountability as to where kids are at that point. And some kids are going to be right where we hope they're going to be, and there's going to be a lot of kids that, or some kids that may not be there. And I'm just trusting our PLC groups and the professionalism of our staff that they're keeping track of that, so that next year those things are accounted for as they begin instruction.
I think that's where the true assessment will need to happen, is when they go into that next class next year, that the teacher at that point looks at where each kid is and meets them where they're at. And I agree that we've taken away the kind of the equal playing field for many kids by taking away the building. And I think going to a pass fail or a pass no pass is the right thing to do.
It's really helpful to me to hear all the comments from Brian and Marcy in terms of the way staff is continuing to work together as a team. And that was something that I was concerned about, because I was hearing impressions that expectations were all over the map. Some teachers were having trouble adjusting their expectations and were dumping on all kinds of work, and others were not. But I'm a lot more comfortable after hearing what I'm hearing tonight, that maybe that was last week and that was the test run, and we're already doing things to pull the teams back together, however they're doing it, to better get on the same page. And again, none of this is ideal. I don't think we have any choice but to allow a lot of flexibility, and hopefully we can really be gracious and patient with each other, both the staff and the students, in terms of managing those expectations. And moving forward is moving forward. And we want to help whatever that looks like for each individual student. The pass-fail piece of it and the letter grade of it, I mean, isn't this the dream world? Now we do get to actually focus on how we're moving the needle for each and every student. It's reduced to that, and it's not about a letter grade anymore. It's about how can I meet each kid where they're at and give them what they need in this environment. So I just hope you pass back my thanks and our thanks for the realization that we understand what we're asking of staff and students at this time. And it's just really gratifying to hear the multiple ways they continue to collaborate and work together as a team to deliver what's in the best interest of all our students.
I mean, to build off of that, Julie, one of the things that I think I ended my week with last week, and I shared it with Brian Borowski, I had a communication from a staff member who was talking, we just emailed me to let me know about the value of her collaborative team with her colleagues and how much that's meant to her, and being able to, and she's a relatively newer teacher to our district, and then also reiterating that and it goes back to what Marcy and Brian said, is as they saw kids engaging or not engaging, her picking up the phone and calling them, talking to the parents, talking to the kids. And it was a great way to kind of end the week, to hear really some positive things of a teacher. And I know that's representative of many of our staff who are doing very similar things. So it's I'm supportive of the recommendation tonight to move this forward. Brian, I know that you really, as you're working with your staff, need to bring some clarity to exactly what that means. But the first step we need is some latitude from the board, again, to allow us to look at that for this semester.
Thank you, Randy. So are we ready to make a motion on this?
Yeah, Joan, I'll make the motion that the board, pursuant to the authority under section 151.5, suspend the line in our 345.1 rule regarding pass-fail, that no courses are to be offered on pass-fail basis at the high school or middle school.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just have you repeat the first part so that Rebecca has that? You were quoting a statute there, or were you quoting something from the policy?
Our policy 151.5, that the operation of any Board of Education policies not established by law may be temporarily suspended by majority vote. So
Thank you.
by this presumably majority vote, it would temporarily suspend Rule 345.1, that specific line that you cited, for the remainder of the semester.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike, for clarifying that.
I would second that as Mike stated it. Julie.
Any other discussion or questions on this? Okay.
I would like to make an amendment that the temporary be set as this school year for the 1920 school year.
That was the way I worded it, just say this semester.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, any other questions? So, David?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Judy?
Aye.
Jack?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Julie?
Aye.
And Joan? Aye. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
The next one is really just a modification to our employment guidelines for our teaching staff. This is with regards to the deadline for accumulating points per professional development as we look at for salary increases for this next coming up year. The latitude within the guidelines gives me the latitude to extend it till the end of June. But given the circumstances we're in, as far as really us being a bit limited on what some of those options might be for some of our staff, and also not exactly sure what summer is going to look like, and wanting to give as much flexibility as we can to our teaching staff to really complete some of the professional development that they may have on their minds without having to worry about trying to make it all work between now and June 14th. My recommendation would be to be able to extend the deadline for accumulation of points for consideration for compensation to August 14th. August 14th is the Friday before our new staff would come, which I would view as the beginning of the next school year. So this is not within the policy, it is within our employment guidelines, which we do have the ability to make modifications to. So I'm looking to just extend that deadline so we can give more latitude to our staff over the summer.
Randy, who's driving this?
Me and Brian. This is a piece that as we're starting to look at the conversation about how to really do points while we have a bit of a less of a structure to our day, we still feel it's important to be able to provide some professional development and for staff to be able to participate it while we're working remotely. But I guess as we look at the summer pieces, and particularly not knowing exactly when we're going to be able to do some of our activities, some of our school improvement institutes, et cetera, will probably be happening later on in the summer, and wanting to be able to provide some latitude to this. I don't think this is a real big risk to us because we already have the ability to carry over points from one year to the next. It just gives us some latitude to be able to accomplish some things over the summer that right now are a big unknown. I know this is causing some stress for some staff who know that they're trying to figure out how they can fit pieces in. Brian, do you have anything to add I know you've had some conversations on the side as well.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to Randy's comments is that in addition to being internal to our administrative team, we have certainly had teachers reach out to me individually and collectively as part of the WTA leadership group to question what we're going to do in terms of points and points activities, when those will be available to folks and what those deadlines will be. As I think there's certainly a number of different reasons why teaching staff could have planned to have been working on points activities in the spring. And certainly the pandemic has upset that cart across not only our district, the state and nation, and it's changed how college courses are going to be delivered, when they're going to be delivered. It's canceled conferences. It's changed a wide variety of different, very typical professional development activities that our staff would engage in. And I think we need to provide them some opportunity to find some of those things to replace what they've lost, which many have lost this spring.
Thanks, Brian.
Any other questions on that, or do you need a vote on that, Randy?
I do, because that would be a modification to the employment guidelines.
Okay.
I move that we so adopt it. I'll make the motion that we so adopt the modification.
By Mike.
Second, Mark.
By Mark. I just would like to say this certainly makes sense, because many of those professional development and point opportunities require group settings, and I think it shows good faith by modifying this, so I'm really happy that you brought this forward. Any other questions or concerns? Okay, starting with David.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Judy.
Aye.
Jack.
Aye.
Mark.
Aye.
Julie.
Aye.
And Joan. Aye. Thank you.
Just on the same topic of points, I mean, thank you for that support. This will be something now that Brian will also be working with our teaching staff as we move forward with kind of what does the remainder of our year look like for points eligible programs. We still want to keep some of those options going, try to use it as a time where we can move forward some of the district specific work. But I think this gives us some latitude also for some options for the summer, which I greatly appreciate. All right, some items that at this point don't need any adoption, but we just want to give you an update on. Initial questions that came early on in our process as we went into closure was how are we going to deal with the calendar for the rest of the year? As I took a look at that, I made the decision, I think we just stay with our district calendar. And I think that's similarly to what I think other districts are doing as well. So as we have either days off or we have professional development days, we will utilize those. Obviously, we have to make some shifts in some of our programs and how we're going to do that. But I still think that those make sense to stay within a predictable calendar that we have. So that's the first piece. Also, the calendar really drives kind of our contractual days with many of our staff. So I think it makes sense to stay with it for that purpose as well. Additionally, there are some waivers that I need to bring forward, though I've been reviewing them as they've been coming through. The only one that I know right now that we have to make some movement on is the one with regards to hours of instruction. It's very much a form that we'll need to fill out and submit to DPI, which they have really streamlined very nicely for everybody to get approval on those. It does require a public hearing though. That is one piece that's not getting waived out of this. So at a future meeting, I will schedule this. We will conduct a public hearing. If we're still in a remote situation like this, the public hearing, I believe the latitude we've been given is to do it similarly to how we did public comments tonight, letting there be notice that this would be a hearing on this provision, and then that people can submit their comments either in person by showing up at the place of location where the meeting will be hosted. Tonight would be like Bethel Circle, or submitting them electronically to us before the meeting. But that's a piece that I'll be bringing forward at a subsequent meeting. And then the last item I just was really an FYI piece. I believe I shared this with the board in a subsequent message, but Brian and Steve have been working with our insurance providers. And one of the things that we've taken a look at is particularly with the clinic situations going to televisits, of making some shifts within our own wellness clinic, reducing some of the hours down, utilizing the televisit piece for our staff. And then obviously the staff would have the options to then, who work in the clinic, to also fill in for some of the needed areas at area clinics within the SSM system. Brian and Steve, do you have anything to add with regards to the wellness clinic and some of the changes that are taking place moving forward?
We have the flexibility within our agreement to if we see a change or an opportunity for employees to begin or start using the clinic more at a consistent rate, we have that opportunity to flex and kind of reinstate those hours. This is, I guess kind of a confluence of three things. The CDC recommending that the general public doesn't use the healthcare system in person unless need to. Certainly the stress on the SSM and Dean system to get staff where they need them, and then also just the overall safety of the staff that works there and our own employees. And so it also happens to be that there's a financial benefit to us, but it was really those other things that drove that decision. The financial benefit was just, I guess, a nice additional add to that.
Brian, are those employees able to get like full-time or their normal salary with SSM? Are they able to fill in at clinics for them?
What they communicated, the SSM and Dean clinic managers communicated to us is that employees have two options. There's what they call redeployment opportunities for them, or they also have similar, but I guess what you'd also see is they also have the opportunity to refuse that redeployment and use, they've been granted additional leave, but they also would have their typical leave. So employees aren't forced to take redeployment, but they're given an opportunity to do that, is what they shared with us.
All right, thank you.
Any other question on the wellness clinic changes? All right, that's the end of what I have to bring forward under this agenda item tonight, Joan.
Okay, thank you. So the next part of our meeting is to look at our self-evaluation before we go into closed session to look at Randy's evaluation. So I believe we could probably go back to screen, Randy. I don't know if we need that up in the background.
All right.
Can we go back to a screen where we see each other?
Is that good?
Yeah.
Yep.
I wonder if we can get, so I don't see Mike or Jack.
We do.
Okay. All right, so on the evaluation part of our meeting, I guess the first thing that I would like to address is maybe our school perceptions. And in a tab on your board book, you will have a filled out with ratings in there. And I don't think we need to labor over this, but if there are any portions of those items that we would like to kind of bring forward as, I kind of went through and I looked at things that we are doing really well at, because I don't think we want to lose sight of what we do well at. I think that we, have constructive professional discussions at our meeting. We maintain a lot of mutual respect and professional behavior. We value differences of opinion, and we work well with our superintendent and look at his leadership. So, I kind of went through and looked at some of the things that we rated highest. And then I also went through and looked at things that got some of the lowest ratings. But again, I am open to anybody's view on this. When I look at the lowest ratings, the 4 lowest ratings really deal with our interaction with legislation and advocacy, and where we fall on that. And you know, the tool that we're using is not a tool that we have made up personally for Waunakee. It's a tool that, you know, kind of fits a more general population, and having 4 of those items very low, maybe we need to talk about our perspective on that component of our work, and if it's important, and how we might insert it into a greater component to our work than we've done in the past. Any comments on that? So the 4 items that I'm looking at are inviting legislators to our school, regularly communicating with our legislators about bills, regularly discussing legislative issues during our board meetings, and legislative advocacy process to monitor issues and communicate our positions to legislators. So those 4 items were our lowest. So I just wonder where everybody is on the continuum of making that something we should have a focus on.
Well, I personally don't hold them as high priorities.
Thank you.
On the other hand, and I know I'm on my way out, we have those extra assignments in addition to the committee assignments that we kind of prioritize. And I would say there's a couple things on those list of other duties that maybe I do think across the current board, I'm fairly certain, currently there are varying degrees of skill, interest, and already engagement with the legislative process. So perhaps another way to handle this would be to designate a legislative liaison function for one of the board members as part of the board reorg. And it would be someone who had interest in maintaining those relationships, making contacts, and carrying messages forward when issues do come up. I have to say, I'm frustrated with the timing of all this, the stuff that was coming through the wind about dyslexia and how that relates to 504s, and whether our district was going to make a stance in terms of publishing guideline books and you know, the proposal that we now screen all students for dyslexia. Like, what, really? You know, I wish we could have talked about that as a board, because I do think it was another one of those items that if that legislation would have gone through, it felt like a mandate that was going to have all kinds of obligations to us without necessarily funding to support the professional development, the screening tools, the means to carry through with all the proper support. So that's one example of an issue that I really wished we could have had more discussion about and been engaged with. One way of handling that perhaps could be to designate a liaison person.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Go ahead, Joan.
No, I kind of had those thoughts myself, and even, I mean, we do have people who have an interest, and I think maybe if somebody if somebody steps forward, or if we make it more of an assignment and be more vigilant on it, we would have those discussions and maybe would have a greater impact on some of the bills and the legislation that come up.
Yeah, I concur. I guess in my 5 years, that's the thing that's frustrated me to a degree. They're important things, but we're so focused on huge issues, different issues, the day-to-day issues, that unless we really assign it as an area of importance, it's not going to be attended to. And Dave, you mentioned multiple times that by the time we're ready to respond to something, we're 3/4 around the racetrack getting to the finish line and it's almost too late. And so I like that idea, Julie, about maybe making it a specific opportunity for someone on the board to be more vigilant and then bring it to the board as we need to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think there's another part to this too, though. I mean, we talk about the legislature, but it seems lately we've been hearing a lot out of the.
Dave, your vocal is coming off again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
Okay, I think one thing that's been happening lately is we've been hearing a lot from the village of Waunakee about their image of the school district. And I think we need to start paying attention to that more. We have a great reputation within, most of the school district, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be more vigilant about maintaining those relationships and maintaining our image of our school district. And I think part of working on politics or the legislature or whatever is also working with the villages and the other municipalities within the school district.
Are you talking like a liaison person more specifically to the different village municipalities that we represent? Is that what you're talking about, that engagement as opposed to statewide legislative engagement, Dave?
Yeah, I think it goes hand in hand. And I think we need to see it, but every time we bring up the politic end or a little bit about how we interact with other governments, we talk about it always as a legislative thing, as a state level thing. But I think we've been missing a little bit about how we impact and are impacted by these other municipalities within our jurisdiction and how that affects people's view of us. Are we the reason property taxes went up in Waunakee last year? Well, some people seem to think so. I don't think so. But it's definitely affecting our image and what we can and can't do within the community.
But don't we have that, I totally agree that we've got to get our message out there. I'm not sure what we as a district can specifically do from a legislative standpoint, other than say, hey, we support this policy or that policy. But you've got 425 or 430 districts out there, and that's really what's going to drive legislation. We've got a communications director now. Shouldn't that person be putting out the message that this is not, our from a property tax standpoint, positioning? Isn't that what we brought that person on for?
But we don't have, Jack, we don't have that person yet.
Okay. I thought we were going to bring her on in January.
We have it posted, we have it selected of who we would interview, and then we decided to move ahead with our principal hires first, and then COVID-19 hit. So right now we're in a position where that's in process but not completed.
Understood.
Yep, so that's where we're at. I think I hear two things, just to kind of add some clarity as I'm taking a few notes here. One is trying to see if we can have somebody who has an interest to designate to kind of be a tracker, a communicator, someone to be a liaison back to the board about state legislation. And then what I hear Dave saying is really a piece about, in addition to the state level politics, we need to also be engaged in maintaining and building relationships with our local municipalities. Is that what I heard you say, Dave?
Yes, that's what I heard.
Dave, is that what I just wanted to put, I don't want to put words in your, that's just what I wrote down as I heard you talking.
Yes, I had to unmute before I could say that.
All right, good deal.
But I think it's more important that we engage with the local, political groups and townships and things like that. I think that's more important for us and the success going forward than on the state level.
Jack, how would you see that looking, engaging in local?
Well, I think when Peggy was on the board, I remember early on, we were talking about potentially having like a local government summit, where we could come together, once a year. And apparently in the past they did that as well. So, if you get the township officials and the village officials, and maybe it's even bringing a couple school boards together, in the area.
Yeah, we used to do something, Jack, called the Growth Task Force that met, I believe, monthly or quarterly. And that was, I think Tim Schell kind of led that as part of the district. And then annually we would have a growth task force, kind of a speaker come in. We had a bit of a sharing of food, and then really interaction and networking between all of the elected officials that were within our school district. And I think what Peggy was looking at was, do we go back to some of the annualized pieces where we invite in all of our elected officials, and so we can have more face-to-face conversation and structure to that.
Well, and I think, having a program like that, it's more of a networking. You got heavy hors d'oeuvres where you could kind of mingle as opposed to having a sit-down meal. And you might even want to do it off-site, at some local establishment, where, you're really developing more of a relationship between, the different folks, as opposed to just getting together and say, there's a growth task force, but we're also trying to build bridges and relationships.
I 100% agree with you that it starts with building those relationships. How you accomplish that and where the intersect is, I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way to do it. There's just more than one ways to skin the cat. And maybe that's a reflection of both how the board determines those priorities, and again, strengths and interests of whatever the current board is, and the manpower on hand that has an interest in
I would
shaping what that looks like a bit.
I would suggest that at the board retreat, we talk about it. That's an agenda item. I don't think we're going to solve it today.
Good idea.
I think you're right. The other thing that I picked out, other than that chunk of legislative items, is another item that scored relatively low is initiatives in place to facilitate leadership succession in key administration positions. Was quite low. And I didn't know as a board if we wanted to give Randy any other feedback on that. I know he's brought that up, or where people are, or why people scored that as they scored it.
I guess from my standpoint, I think the way we're operating right now is good, because, if you look at our current principal, it was a competitive process, and, I think the right people got those positions. And, you may get a different skill set, or maybe there's a gap in the skill sets that we would be looking at. And if we sit and say, okay, we're going to have these chairs, we're just, I don't know if you put that in policy or what, but, again, that would be a topic for, a retreat discussion, an agenda item.
I think, there has been some concern more about the central administrative leadership.
Yes.
Succession. And I guess I would say that we're in the process with the framework that Randy shared with us at the start of the school year, with the administrative flow and how that's progressing, I think there is a clarity, there is a path. I don't think it's finished yet. And you can look at what's happened this school year and all the different dynamics that may have intervened with making that the primary focus, but I think we're off to a start. I think we have a clearer idea, at least for our superintendency, what happens if something were to happen to Randy. Where would the immediate assistance come from to assume leadership? And the rest of it, I think, will come in time as we work through some of these other issues.
Well, I think if you're talking about, Randy goes down, who steps up? I think there should be something in policy or a leadership there, but I don't think it should be a guaranteed that person just takes the position, because there could be some different dynamics that we want to bring into the district.
No question.
If that's what you mean, I agree with you, Mark.
I think the point of some of that focus was to avoid having to react to an immediate crisis, to better be positioned that at least pieces of jobs could be handed off. I do think there are some other key administrators that are likely to turn in the short term that again, I think Randy's done some good base work to lay groundwork, but you think of like student services, director of curriculum, how those tasks and chores and assignments, it would be good if you had more than one option for how that was going to flow out, and you didn't just wait for somebody to leave, whether it was of their own volition or some intervening emergent crisis.
Well, I
appreciate that the work was started. I think it is a fairly high priority to keep working on.
Well, I think it's something that we need to work on, but I think we've also talked at previous board meetings and probably this previous evaluation that we should be doing some cross training so that if somebody does leave, we can plug somebody in. Prime example of that was our payroll. Nobody was cross-trained, and our payroll person said, "Hey, I want to go after another opportunity," and we were scrambling. And I think it's important to do cross-training so that more than one person, if somebody has a long-term illness, how do we keep the ship moving forward? I agree with that, with those dynamics.
If I can add something, if I go back to like what Julie said, I think when we get to later on in the agenda, when we get into my evaluation, I can speak more specifically to some of the things that I think Julie is referencing. I think part of the things that we have to talk about, and it's really a board decision, and it gets into budgetary issues, is some of the, I think what we've titled it here is succession planning. The way I've kind of organized it is, it's kind of how do we need to be structured, and I'm speaking specifically administratively as we continue to grow as an organization. And some of that needs to also be considered within our budget guidelines and with the budget in mind of other priorities. And that's a piece that I think is going to be a very prominent piece for our discussions here, particularly as I know Steve and I and Brian were talking just today about really what our next budget committee meeting is going to look like as we're rolling forth the first draft of the budget. We have some key decisions to make, some of which really can either ebb one way or the other with regards to some of the leadership pieces we're talking about.
Thank you, Randy. Is there any other board member that wants to bring up any of the items in the school perception that kind of stuck out to you as something that we should address as a group?
One thing I guess I would like to bring up, and I can't pull it up fast enough here to go with it. I was surprised at the high rating we gave for our public communications, particularly with some of the negative comments we've received at board meetings with our use of social media. And at some point, maybe, I don't know if it's tonight or at the retreat, but I really do think we need to talk about how well we actually are delineating what voice is speaking on behalf of the board and which is a personal voice. I don't think it's always clear to, I don't think it's clear to the community which voice is speaking sometimes.
I would agree. Anything else on the school perception? If not, the next document that I would like to address or look at are the summary questions, kind of staying with the board self-evaluation. There were 4 open-ended questions. The first one being listing strengths. I think that pretty much the same list that we came up with in our most positive ratings, again, came up on that list. Then we have areas to improve upon. And again, I guess I would just like to give anybody an opportunity. I mean, everybody can read it, but if anybody wants to have this opportunity to more vocally address things that you would like the board to improve upon, I think this would be the opportunity to do that. And I know it's not the most setting.
I guess from my standpoint, and I've mentioned it before, is if we could do you know, some planning, you know, and set our agendas. We know what's coming up every year. You know, we've got budgets, we've got assessments, we got all of this kind of stuff. If we did a better job on saying this is where we want these in our curriculum, and from a board standpoint, what do we want to say we're moving the district forward? That would give Randy and his team a better opportunity to prepare and move forward.
Well, some of that, Jack, I think is what we attempt to do in the priorities. Would you agree with that? That our priorities are our directive to Randy on moving the district forward?
Yeah.
Well, and I think actually this month, we lost one of those opportunities with the administrative board meeting joint meeting we were going to have to talk. It was focused on budget, but it was also looking at building goals and where they saw themselves going forward. And I know a number of us had expressed the hope that we could work with administrative staff, excuse me, in not giving a plan top down, but coming up with a plan together where we wish to go. And so that April meeting, I thought was actually a pivotal piece to accomplishing some of that. And obviously it got put to the side because of the crisis.
Yes, I agree that I think that a lot of the work toward those priorities were yet to come this year. I think we are losing some valuable meeting time, both with our community and together with administrative staff on some of the budget priorities. Anybody else want to comment on anything that you would like to add to the list of items that the board could improve upon?
I would like to recommend that we bring this list with us to the retreat.
I agree. I think that would be an excellent idea of addressing some of this. The next item is what would be the most important thing the board needs to work on, and what will be the greatest impact on student learning. I'm a big advocate on looking at student learning and getting some of the accomplishments as well as student-centered achievement marks in front of the board more. Again, it doesn't happen frequently enough for me, and there are other people who share that concern. But if anybody wants to, again, just address their comments or address anything that they would like to in this setting, I guess that's the purpose of this meeting. And again, if not, everybody has been able to read it. I like Mark's idea of bringing these lists with us when we get to a more of a group setting where we can discuss it in more length and possibly the board retreat this summer. And finally, in that list, we have what do we need to learn as a board? Again, I think that there are some excellent ideas here on things that as a board we can kind of work on together. And again, I just would like to give everybody the opportunity to bring up any of these as a group in this setting.
I don't know where I saw it, but and I know it's not always easy, and of course this year I didn't attend, but particularly some of the items are really geared for the state convention. And both the WASB publication and the state convention provides a glimpse as to the path education is going on. And I think the more we can all as a group attend, the more knowledgeable we can become.
Yes, that is a great opportunity. I have so appreciated all that I have learned in my attendance at those meetings.
I guess as it relates to these 4 things too, I think I write the same thing down every single year. But the frustration with, I'm so glad we continue to make it a priority to hold those listening sessions, but our inability to close the loop and to efficiently get back to staff with what we heard and what we're doing about it continues to be a huge frustration to me. And I don't know how many times we can convene and ask staff to come tell us what they think and then take copious notes, write them all up. And
well, Julie, I did try to respond. I did send out in, I believe, December this year in response to your concern, and it was brought up at one of our board meetings. In addition to that, I guess I would like to know what else you would like from either, myself or administrators in closing the gap on what we hear at the listening session.
The specific one that, I don't know how much detail we want to get into here. The specific one that really bothers me was those concerns about placement for people in active bio and the remediation courses. And what I heard was staff really wanting more engagement with that process. And the way I felt like we handled it as a board was we asked more administrators to come talk to the curriculum committee. And that's what we did about it. I don't know that staff has any more clarity on that process or has had any ability to continue to be actively engaged in both just the selection of those students and also monitoring the progress of those students and giving more direct input to decisions that basically what I heard were made by administration and staff didn't understand how and why they were made. So that's one example. It just struck me really, really hard as something that we should have reacted to more quickly. And our chosen path of response to that was to have administration come talk to a committee.
One of my frustrations has been at times our journey seems more the tortoise and the hare. And there were a number of items that I went through the whole list and I tried to check off which ones really got addressed and taken care of. And I don't know that a lot were taken care of. I know a large number were addressed, and some things I think take time. And I don't know as a board what we can do with some of the things that come up are building centric. And I think as a board, we need to alert the building administrator and Randy, look, this keeps coming up. Is there something that can be done? It's not necessarily a board action. It's a administrative action and a staff action that needs to continue. Some of them are ongoing. I look at some of the concerns for the non-teaching staff in terms of wages and benefits.
Yep, that was another one.
Things done. Well, we are working on it. It's not fast enough. You know, I felt awful from one of our policy committees where that happened in October, and with regard to the busing thing that just got taken care of at our last together meeting. It took that long and the school year's over. And so issues come, the process isn't necessarily built for an immediate response, and not response, but completion. And I don't know how we can streamline that, but there are more things that are on that list that I thought are being attended to, not completed, but attended to than aren't. And
I guess in defense of the curriculum issue, because we have a change in administration at our high school level, I was pretty comfortable with their response in their commitment to really look at that issue and to hear what our concerns were, and our concerns were what the staff brought out. And again, curriculum changes are very slow. You need a lot of input, you need a lot of consideration, and in that particular issue, I really feel that we need to give Brian Borowski an opportunity to bring that forward as he sees, because I think he did hear us, and he, you know, I know sometimes we just bring it up and we don't see resolution or a conclusion, but I agree with Mark. It's more of a process, and it's bringing these things up to the right people so that the administrator who could make a difference has the information available to continue or to begin the process.
I agree with that. And, you know, some of these things are budget issues. And, you know, I think if, you know, as we go forward, you know, if we can articulate what the heck we're doing, I think, you know, people, they may not like it, but at least, you know, they're moving, and, you know, they're somewhat satisfied.
Anybody else want to comment on any part of the board evaluation, either the school perception or the open-ended questions? Otherwise, we could turn to the priorities, right, Randy? We're going to do the priorities and open, and then just do your personal evaluation in the next link.
Yeah, that's right. The board and superintendent priorities are an open session item, and those were that I presented on kind of a brief overview at the March meeting.
Correct. And people were able to rank them, and you know, they all indicate progress, some more than others, and I think we recognize that you know, for the budget and even the referendum planning, we were gearing up, and we were entering into some very critical times and meetings for those priorities, and it obviously has really changed in this arena right now. But there were some comments that were made, both, you know, positive, disappointments, and again, as we conclude our discussions tonight, the next step to this process is to either continue with these particular priorities or to, you know, address any new set of priorities. But this is kind of one of those times where we want to give Randy some direction on what we as a board expect of him. So looking at the priorities and that list and the comments that were made, again, I'm not going to read through them with you. Everybody has had a copy. Everybody has had the opportunity to look at it. I know that the referendum planning is on the board meeting for next Monday, and a discussion of the time frame and where we all feel about that. So, you know, we might want to wait till that to have that discussion. We have
to interact on that one. There'll be some more on Monday, as you said. We'll also be kind of giving you some timelines of when decisions have to be made for different points there, so you can. We do have some time to make that decision, but I'll be able to outline for you on Monday some more specifics of what our options are and what timelines we have that are associated with each of those options.
The second priority is stronger connections with school buildings and staff. And again, many people made comments. We all have personal lives, and the amount of time and that we each have available school buildings and to connect with staff is limited. Again, anybody want to make any comments about where we're at with that priority?
If I can add something too, Joan, I mean, one of the things I was hoping to do this spring was to bring all the each of the buildings back through the board. I think that was a piece that we had talked about, and even if that was part of the curriculum committee, et cetera. I think that's still a good piece for us to keep as we start to plan for next year. And maybe that's a piece we kick off the school year with, is kind of where people were and then where they're headed with some of the work that's going on in buildings.
Yeah, I think for me anyway, I would really like to hear where our buildings are at and their goals for the year and where they are at with things.
Yep.
The strategic planning and budget, again, unfortunately, one of our key meetings have been canceled at this point, or at least, you know, and I don't know, Randy, if you have any idea about moving that budget into this kind of format to get some input, or, you know, we haven't talked about that, but it, you know, obviously the budget planning is difficult with that.
Steve, Brian, and I had I think our first joint meeting regarding the next draft of the budget on Tuesday. So that's a piece right now. Certainly that was what we were planning on, was having a pretty involved workshop setting for our staff, our administration, and our board. So that's a piece that I would, I'd like to see if we can continue to do in the future. I don't know how to do it all virtually, but maybe there are some ways that we can determine how we can get some input on some things particularly as we start to pull together the first drafts of the budget.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. It would help me to kind of see where your priorities are and to kind of weigh in on some of that. The fourth priority was about board policy. I commend Mike and Randy and our policy committee to, you know, all the effort and work that was done in that particular priority this year. And lastly, the review of employee compensation and benefits. I think Brian Gabarski has really championed a lot of work in that area. I know that we had an HR meeting that to kind of hear of some of that progress, which also was recently canceled. And I know these priorities, many of them are ongoing, and I feel many of them will come up again. But is there anybody on the board that would like to make any comments on where we're at with our current priorities?
I'll just say it one more time because I'm on my way out. So again, in terms of the strategic planning and budget connection in particular, it still always feels to me like the board is brought in fairly late to the game. And what we end up doing is, it's great how Randy collaborates with his administrative team, but I feel like they set the agenda and we react to that. And, you know, maybe that's the way everyone prefers it and that's how we want it. But it will be interesting to me as the board changes. I know the person that's due to take my seat has a really strong interest, it sounds like, in co-curricular things. And that's one of those budgetary areas that we've kind of left in place and totally been hands off in terms of fuller board discussion of priorities and wading through that and how that whole section is managed. And it will be interesting to see how it changes going forward with a new voice and a new lens and a new perspective. So again, it's a great time for me to go.
We will miss you, Julie. Any other concerns on the priorities? If not, you know, at the end of all the evaluation summaries, we do bring the priorities back to kind of go forward for the next year. So at this point, we can go into closed session, I believe. So do we need a motion?
What I would just say before you do the motion, as we go into closed session, the board will exit out of this meeting and we will go into a closed session. There's an additional link that was sent to the board in order to do that. And then once the closed session is done, this will not go back up on the air and we'll be adjourning right as we come out of closed session. So the only action items that'll take place as we complete my evaluation in the closed session piece is to then adjourn the meeting.
But we do want a motion to go into closed now, and we'll do a roll call of that, and then we'll kind of close out and go back in.
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay, so I need a motion to go into closed.
So move to go into closed session.
Second.
Second. David?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Judy?
Aye.
Jack?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Julie?
Aye.
Joan? Aye. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Taylor. Okay, we'll